Hello and welcome to Tight Lines. It's always exciting to welcome newcomers to the bothy, and we try to find special anglers to bring their talents and advice to you. This week I think we've actually excelled ourselves, and I'm sure you'll enjoy meeting Kev Hewitt. Kev's a carp angler right out of the top drawer, whether catching target fish, competing in carp matches, or helping newcomers to the sport, as you'll find out over the next hour. As well as the tactical chat also coming up today, we'll see Kev in action at Bluebell Lakes, the scene of his greatest triumph, where he gave us an insight into his day ticket water tactics and proved just how well they work. We'll have a report on last weekend's inaugural British Lure Angling Championship final at Chew Valley, where 60 anglers went head-to-head at the top predator venue. And I'll have information for all types of anglers in Fishery Focus, with my weekly take on the sport being found and best approaches to take on different waters around the UK. Well, mate, welcome to the Madhouse. It's great to have you in the bothy, I've got to say.
Nice to be here.
And we've got to start, haven't we? We've got to talk about Dave. I mean, what a name for a fish, and what a fish.
I know, it's not often you turn up to a lake and your target fish is called Dave, so yes, it was one that I've been after probably 13 months now. I've been on the venue, and that was the specific fish that I was targeting, so there she
Bluebell
is.
Lakes has got quite a few fish and quite a few big fish.
There is. It is a complex of around four or five different lakes, and there's some big fish in most of them, but Swan Lake is the one that I've been targeting.
Yeah.
It's got a couple, that's the biggest fish in the lake. There's a couple that aren't far behind it, which I'll be going back for to try and catch.
And what did Dave weigh when you caught?
£53, 4 ounces.
53, 4, that's massive fish.
It is a big fish, yes.
Has it been progressively growing? Has the growth been charted?
It's progressively getting a bit bigger. I'd say in a few years' time it could potentially go £60. Really? So, yeah.
It's got a huge frame,
It
hasn't
has, yeah, massive frame. And the width, you can't appreciate the width of it from the photographs. It really is a big fish.
Yeah. Well, we were seeing a bit more of Dave later on. And Kev was back at Bluebell Lakes last week, and we took the opportunity to see how he approaches things at this time of year. We joined him on a lovely and very fruitful morning.
Well, I've had a couple of fish in quick succession this morning, and this is an absolute peach of a 29.5 pound mirror. Absolutely glorious in the early morning sunshine. Let's get her back and have a look at the other fish I've got in the net. Well, here's the second part of this morning's brace. A fabulous common, weighed 28.5 pound, proper mint condition, got a really nice mouth on it, a really big paddle tail. Fought like a demon. Bait is so important to me. It's what the carp are eating, and ultimately it's what gets them feeding and what gets you your bites. So let's have a quick look at the mix. One of the first ingredients that I always put into my spod mix is hemp, and I cook that up nice and fresh at home before I come down, and the carp just love to feed on it and pick it up and crunch it, and because they're such small items it keeps them feeding for ages, and it just keeps them troughing around and keeps them coming back to the same spot till they clean every single bit up. The next ingredient that I add to the mix is good old sweet corn. One thing I found over the years is that carp absolutely love sweet corn. I've been using it ever since I've started carp fishing, really. So once I mix that in with the hemp, I just give it a good stir, and then we're ready for the final ingredient. Next up, I add a real high quality boilie to the mix. We're coming to the back end of the year now. It's starting to get a little bit cooler, and I tend to scale down on the bait size. I've gone down to 10 millers, and I'll stay with the 10 millers going through the winter. One of the key aspects on this boilie is it's quite a soft bait, and it's a really highly digestible. And I think that's one of the key things that I look for in a winter bait. It needs to be digestible so that the fish can eat it, pass it through their system, and come back and carry on eating it, really. So I add a good helping of those to the mix, and I mix this into the mix probably a couple of hours before I spot it out, which allows the juices to absorb up into the boilies and make them even softer, to make them easier for the carp to digest, and also all the liquids in the hemp, they start leaking off the bait and creating that attraction which draws the fish into the swim. As the weather gets colder and colder, there's one thing I start to add to the mix, and that's the little wrigglers, maggots. Carp absolutely love them in winter, and I go on about the digestibility of baits, and maggots is one of the easiest baits for carp to digest, and they just absolutely love them. They do eat them all year round, but they really come into their own in the winter. I like to have a nice mixture of colours, all wriggling away, and I drop them into the spod mix, and as the winter goes on I'll probably put more and more into the mix. The rig I use over the top of this pretty much stays the same all year round. It's basically my own version of the hinge stiff rig really, and I actually use a ready-made chod rig to start with, and I attach a coated braid that is sort of semi-stiff, I'd say, so it just kicks it out and keeps it nice and straight. And I also use a nice rig boom again just to kick it out from the lead, so basically it makes the rig 100% tangle proof. Let's get it out into the pond and see if we can get a bite. Well, I've just had an absolute melter and it's still taking line. I've just managed to stop it. It's probably taken about 40 yards of line and it's just hit a weed bed. I can just feel it grating through the weed. It's going to take a fair while to get this fish in. Just got to keep the pressure on it, keep it steady. It's very, very weedy out there at the moment, and most fish have weeded me up at some point in the stage, some stage in the fight. And just got to keep the pressure on it and keep it coming. What I tend to do when a fish weeds me up, just build up the pressure slowly and just gently walk back and just see if you can ease it out of the weed. You'll find that more often than not they just pop out the weed and you're back in contact with the fish again. It's been a very, very weedy year on this lake. I think we've had a good summer and the sun's been out quite a bit and it's caused the weed to grow up a hell of a lot. It's a bit of a nightmare at times, but as long as you've got decent line on, nice strong line, you can just keep walking back and keep the pressure on it. And it's just getting back in contact with the fish again now. Just pulling through that weed bed. I can just keep walking back. Hopefully it'll come clear of the weed any minute. We're gaining line on this one at the moment. It's still in a big weed bed, but we're gaining line. And as long as he keeps coming towards me, I've got every chance of putting this fish on the bank. Get the chesties on. It's quite a shallow margin, so it's always good to wade out a little bit and get closer to the fish. Wow, it's in amongst that big weed bed there. The whole weed bed's coming in actually. The fish is just swirling around in the middle of it. Just got to keep it coming. I don't know if the fish is on here, but I'll soon find out when this big ball of weed approaches the net. In fact, I can just see a fin sticking out. I can see his tail sticking out the back of the weed. So he's definitely in amongst there somewhere. This is going to be tricky trying to get her into the net in amongst all this weed, but at least she's still on there. Let's see what we can do. It's a big old weed bed. I can just see the tail of the fish sticking out the back. And I'm going to have to get some of this weed off. Right, there's the fish. It's a real lovely mirror. And she's away. And she's come out the weed and in the net. That was a bit lucky. Didn't see that happening. It's a pretty decent fish by the looks of it. Well, there's proof of the pudding. Absolutely nailed on the little pop-up, tipped with a bit of plastic corn. Nice barbless hook, so it just slips out nice and easy. A little hinge stiff rig. Real beautiful fish. They all are in here. They're absolute stunners. Each and every one of them. I make that £28, 12 ounces. It don't come much better than that. It was a bit of a funny battle with the weed, and managed to get her in the end. She's an absolute beaut. It's just sort of proof of the pudding, really, that the bait works. You know, it's a nice simple mix. You know, sweet corn, hemp, boilies with a bit of maggot going into the winter, and the fish just absolutely love it.
If that big one's called Dave, I think you should christen that one Harry, because it committed Harry Carry by diving into the net, didn't it? Yeah. Dear, oh dear. I've never seen it. I mean, occasionally you'll get fish when I'm match fishing, they'll mistake the keep net for a weed bed, and very occasionally they'll land it, which is why the clever green ones. But that was just, that was rubbing your hands together, I would think.
At first I didn't notice it in the net. It swam out and I presumed it would have swam away. And it wasn't until I looked down and it was in the net. So that was a good bit of luck. I think it wanted to get on camera, that one.
Yeah, it's one of those. Had its lipstick on already, and a bit of eyeshadow and that. Yeah. It's cracking fish though, and as you say, that the lake has got some real stunners in it. And that one looked a slightly different shade.
Yeah,
the first one
it was definitely a little bit more grey in colour, that one. A lot of them are real dark chestnut mirrors, and the commons are golden, and they're all beautiful. Immaculate.
That common was absolutely immaculate.
Stunning.
No wonder so many people go. I know I've spoken to Max Cottis when he's been there, and Sean Harrison's another one who's been on Swan Lake a bit. Yeah, brilliant stuff. Welcome back, carp angler. Kev Hewitt's with this week, and we saw in part one the picture of the magnificent Dave, and you caught some cracking fish on our film, but they did really pale into insignificance compared with the look at the size of that. Yeah. You said it's hard to describe the width of that fish. That's a proper chunk, mate.
It is. They're not easy to pick up either.
No. But it's got no handles, have they?
No.
Once you get, and I had to learn that the hand around the ventral fin, that's probably, once you get that bit cracked...
It gives you the grip, and also around the front fin as well. If you can just wedge it in between your fingers. But, yeah, it was absolutely huge.
Yeah, I bet it was as well. And they've got gobs like buckets as well, and they can take all sorts of things. But you catch them on really insignificant-looking baits. I mean, that's the bait there.
Yeah, I always use fairly small baits because the food items I'm putting out are always fairly small, a lot particle based, like we've seen.
Yeah.
And a small hook bait over the top is perfect. The last thing you want to do is put out all small baits and then fish a big hook bait over the top.
But the reason why I picked it up on this is because it's part of the rig that you used, and the baits there attached to the rig, and just run through the rig again. I know you did it on the film, but just while I'm holding it there.
Yeah, basically you've got a fairly sort of semi-stiff sort of boom section here, so it always kicks it away from the lead, so no matter where you cast out, it always straightens itself out, and if a fish comes in and picks up the bait and spits it out, it will always reset and straighten itself out. A little bit of putty just to keep it down on the deck, again around the swivel here as well, and the pop-up just pops it up about a couple of inches off the deck just to keep it clear of all the debris and everything. So the rig itself is a ready-made chod rig, absolutely perfectly tied. It's amazing nowadays sort of the quality of the ready-made rigs that are available in the shops.
If I just drop that down, you've actually got one. I've just cut out of the packet because it was more difficult to see in the packaging. But that is, I mean, it's unbelievable. This is a commercially tied rig because the hard bit, and I don't tie any chods now, but the hard bit is to get that the same size. Yes. To tie 2 knots with a couple of centimetres in between is extremely difficult. Yeah. And the neatness, I mean, you've got the tiny little ring in there for tying your bait too.
Yeah, they're difficult to tie, especially the shorter ones, and I've always used those exact rig materials, and when they brought out the ready-made one, it was perfect, exactly how I wanted my rigs to be. So I've used them ever since, to be honest.
Now what I want to do is just to see that rig operating in the tank, because this is the proof of the pudding being in the eating. The proof of the rig is in the drowning. So I'm going to get this tank up here. Evacuated the goldfish for the afternoon. And if you can just... Well, you drop the rig in and we'll see how it works. Because you said the beauty of this rig, you said to me just now, that is its anti-tangle properties.
Yeah, so because of the stiffness of it, it always kicks it away from the lead. So it always sits perfectly just off the bottom, no matter if there's a bit of leaves or anything on the bottom, a little bit of weed, it always sits perfectly popped up.
That is sitting perfect. And you can imagine that sitting that 5 or 6 centimetres off the bottom, and the silly old carp coming, mopping up everything. And they see that one sticking up in front of it. It's like the old Ivan Marks trick of always fishing on a shelf. That bait is much easier to pick up than the ones that are laying on the bottom.
Yeah, it's kind of a classic big fish rig, really. It's always been branded as a big fish rig, and it catches big fish.
Yeah.
As I said, it resets itself every time, and you're always fishing with it.
Do you fish that kind of rig right through the year? Do you ever change to fish it with a bottom bait, or always fish it popped up?
No, I always fish it popped up. I do use it all year round. The only thing sometimes I change in winter, when I start to include more and more maggots into the spod mix, I tend to thread some maggots onto a little needle or onto a hair and just attach them. Instead of where the plastic corn is, I'll replace it with maggots. So I've got like a little pop-up sort of ball of maggots, reducer sort of style, just above the pop-up. And that's pretty much the only tweak I make to it.
Do you ever get your maggots to float?
No, I don't think you can get maggots buoyant enough to pop up the size of the hook that I use.
No, I'm thinking with the pop-up as well.
Yes. So the pop-up, the maggots are just above the pop-up. So I have the pop-up with the maggots on top, and that still sits just off the deck a couple of inches.
I'll tell you what made me think of that. I've used popped-up maggots quite a lot when I've been match carp fishing. And what I do with mine, instead of just, if you just put them in, it's hard to describe this, but if you put enough water in a bait box to go halfway up a maggot, they'll ingest it and it makes them float, but without drowning them. But I've done that with flavour. You've got to use the right flavours, because some of the flavours will kill the maggots, and dead maggots are OK. But if you can get a wriggler that really smells, it sucks in the flavour inside it, that can be absolutely lethal. Have you ever tried that?
I haven't. I may have to give that a go this winter.
There's one for you, mate. I'm going to leave that rig in there. I won't nick it. I will let you have it back afterwards. Now, what I've got behind me are your baits, and this is, I take it, this is your feed mix.
Yeah, see, these are the boilies that I put into the mix along with the hemp, and as you can see, they're small items that I use going into the winter. It's an Equinox boilie, which is highly digestible. It's quite soft. So
is it a bird seed? Bird food mix?
It's got a bit of a blend of, there's a bit of spice in there, a bit of fruit, so have a smell yourself.
I can smell the fruit in this, they really are.
Yeah, so it's an odd blend that works. But
almost citrusy. There's a bit of
everything in there, I
cranberry
think.
type of...
But, yeah, so when the fish feed on them, they're nice and soft, so I believe that they can digest the bait, and the easier they can digest a bait, the more they'll come back and feed on that bait. And
you spoke about a spod mix. How much do you introduce, and do you introduce it really accurately?
Yeah, I always fish really, really accurately. 3 rods on the spot, and I fish them as tight as possible. One thing I always do is fish the 3 hook baits on the spot, and I probably start off on an average session with about 4 kilos to start with.
Do you? Wow.
Yeah, so...
That's a mixture of hemp,
corn
and
boilies,
and boilies, yeah.
And then
what sort of sorry, I'm distracted, but I'm really nosy. What sort of proportions do you do them in?
Probably 60% hemp, and then the rest is sort of sweet corn and boilies, 50-50, maybe a little bit more sweet corn in the mix. Yeah. So I don't use loads and loads of boilies. The advantage of the 10 millers is that you can put a couple of handfuls in and it seems like a lot more.
Yeah.
So
using 25s, don't get much
exactly.
bang for your buck, do you? And on this, I'm just going to go back to this hook bait, because I know a lot of carp anglers, and it's something, when I mentioned the adding some flavour to my maggots to get them ingest the flavour, do you add anything to your hook baits to make it stand out as well as being stuck up off the bottom?
Yeah, definitely. There's always something I use. It's a product Beetalin in black, and it's absolutely gorgeous. It's one of the best flavours that I've found for soaking in plastic baits. So I always have all my plastic baits soaking in it all the time, and I always dip my hook bait in before I cast it out. and the fish just absolutely love it. You want your hook bait to be the most attractive item in the swim to boost your chances of getting a bite quicker, and that is one product that I would never cast out without using.
That is lovely. That's like a almost blackcurranty smell to it. But it's got betaine in as well.
Yeah, it has, which fish absolutely love. It's a feeding stimulant. It's new out this year, and it's
this particular colour.
This particular one is.
Because I used to have one of these. It was brown with like a sediment in the bottom as well.
Yeah, that's correct. That would be the betaine. But yeah, the original betalain was clear, and now this is a betalain in black, which has been very, very popular and successful this year.
The one thing I read about with betaine, one carp angler wrote once in a magazine I read, he thinks it works not only because of the sweetness, that intense sweetness it has, but also because it's actually a zero acidity, because it is an acid. It alters slightly the pH of the water around it, and fish can sense that. Are you a believer in that theory too?
Yeah, without a doubt. Fish, it's their natural environment. They can pick up and detect any changes in it. They can sniff things out from miles off, and it's their environment. It's the same as in our environment. If something changes, you tend to know about it.
Walking past a bakery when I've got the rolls coming out of there, and a really lovely coffee shop when you can't resist it, can you?
Exactly. The
bacon sandwich, mate. It's been many an angler's downfall, the bacon sandwich. You're not expecting to be many a carp angler. That's magic, mate. Absolutely brilliant. Some brilliant silverfish sport in still waters too, with roach fishing coming up to its very best. Although most anglers these days target carp on commercials, fishing for roach isn't difficult and produces sport when the carp don't play ball. I'm not saying carp won't feed this weekend, because they will, but float fishing with maggot or caster is a busy, active way of fishing. No need to cast far, often no need to cast at all, and a pint of bait will produce a good day. For the carp, it's still meat month, don't forget, float fishing or ledgering. As for those anglers who specialise in bigger carp, we have the man here. So, Kev, what would you be doing this weekend?
Big beds of bait and start adding maggots to the spod mix.
So now's the time you start putting the livelies in
definitely.
And keep them going in. And when you say spodding, you said about 3 or 4 kilos of bait at the start. Would you include the maggot in that type?
Yeah, include the maggots in there. Yeah. October is big fish month for me, and they love maggots this time of year.
I think they're really at their best because they've been eating, they're still eating, and they're really fighting fit. Now, sometimes in the summer they're a bit more lethargic, and when it's cold in the winter they're not quite so active, but now it's spot on time.
It's perfect. They have a big sort of winter feed up, really. They get right on the feed this time of year, in my opinion, and they're always at their biggest weights. So they've been having a good feed over the last 6 weeks, and as soon as that cold spell start coming in, they tend to drop off a little bit, but now is the absolute perfect time of the year for catching these big ones.
Now, you mentioned finding your spots, and I'm going to get you to reveal one of your secrets here, because you've got a trick.
I do. I'm very meticulous when it comes to feature finding, and I start off just casting a normal lead around and plumbing for what I deem to be the perfect spot. And once I've found a spot that I'm fairly happy with, I then cast out one of these sea fishing breakaway leads. I've trimmed the little wires back off them so they're not too long. Once I cast that over the spot, it tells you a lot more than a normal lead can. You can drag it back if there's weed on the spot. A lot of the time you cast a normal lead, you don't think there's any weed. You cast this out, and then you could come back with little strands, sometimes a bit bigger weed, and you can tell exactly what's on the spot. Also, if there's clay on the spot, it picks it up and you can bring clay back. So you can really determine what type of spot you're fishing and how clean it is.
Even bits of silt will stick in there, and sand, I suppose. If it comes back clean, you know you're fishing over sand.
And at times I've even dragged bait back with it, so you know that there's not so good bait that's been sat there for a little bit too long, so it wouldn't be a spot that I'd be fishing if I dragged back bait.
No. What about weed? Do you mind dyeing back weed beds? I try and avoid them a bit, but...
I always try and find the cleanest spot possible. Sometimes you don't find a clear spot, and I try and find lighter weed, but yeah, I tend to avoid dyeing back weed. Generally this time of year it dies back quite quickly, and you tend to get a lot of clear spots a lot quicker this time of year, so there's generally always clear spots to be found.
Now, I first came to the notice of your name, but in your competition fishing along with Mark Bartlett, and you were a deadly duo, weren't you? Are you still doing your competitions?
Yeah, I still do quite a few competitions. I do the UK Carp Cup this year. The final's next week, so I've just been preparing all my bits over the last couple of nights for that.
What do you mean by prep? What do you do?
Well, I'll show you a little bucket that I've got down here. I have got all my solid bags ready. I'm going to be using solid bags more than likely for most of my fishing in the match. I think it's one of the best presentations out there, and in matches it's always good to have it prepared. And to be honest, in all my fishing I've always got loads prepared. So I've probably got about 35, 40, maybe a few more solid bags tied up with the rig, with the hook bait inside them, all ready to go really. So when I wind in, I can quickly change them. Some are on lead core leaders, some are on quick change little links, and I can just whack it straight back out and have a rig in place within seconds of winding in. So it saves me time on the bank of tying loads of bags up. And if you get a busy period where you can be catching quite steadily or quite quickly, the last thing you want to do is have a rod out of the water for 5 minutes whilst it takes you sort of to tie up all your PVA bags. So I have loads ready to go, and in all my fishing I'm always prepared and have lots of rigs ready to go.
That really, I mean, there's a lot of cast there, isn't there?
There is. That should keep me going for a fair while.
Where are you fishing at?
It's on Oxley's at the Linear Fisheries
Well,
Complex.
there's a few fish in there, so you could get through quite a lot of those. And they're not all identical, are they? Some have got bigger pellets and particles than others.
Yes, I like to have a mixture of pellets inside there, and a mixture of colour of hook baits as well. Some of them you can just see the hook baits in the bottom.
The yellow corn.
Yeah,
there.
because I tie them in advance, I always use plastic corn. Because of the buoyancy doesn't change. If you were to put a pop-up in there and leave it for a week, the pellets suck some of the air out the pop-ups and they become more buoyant. So plastic corn is the perfect hook bait for sort of tying your bags up in advance, really. And I make them so they're nice and wafty, so they're slow sinking. And the idea behind it is when the PVA breaks down, you get a nice little patch of pellets with a little balanced hook bait in the middle. So the pellets draw the fish in, they come and take a big mouthful, and they can't help but suck up your hook bait.
Yeah, that's really, really good advice. And I particularly like this, and I'm sure there'll be lots of anglers, even match anglers, this comes in useful for, because, you know, the number of times you cast out, think you're fishing right, and you're not really. That's brilliant, mate. You've raised some food for thought this week. I'm really glad we had you in for the first time. Have you enjoyed it?
I have had an absolutely brilliant time.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Thank you very much, because so have I. Time's got the better of us again. Remember to stay in touch with what's going on here via the website and Twitter. And please keep those emails coming in with your young angler photos. It's been great talking to you, Kev, as I said. Thanks so much for coming in, and I'll be back. Next week, we're focusing on the salty stuff, and I'll be joined here by Barney Wright, editor of the new Sea Fishing magazine. We're on at the later time of 9 o'clock on Sky Sports 3. That's Sea Fishing next week at 9 on Sky Sports 3. Don't forget, if you missed that, all the many repeats are available on demand in the Sky Sports section of Catch Up, as we are every week. Have a great week, wherever you're fishing, whatever you're fishing for, and tight lines. Thanks, mate. Well done. I'll let you have those back now.
Enjoy Sky Sports Live. On all screens, on the go, and the best bits on demand.